Why are people obsessed with analog? Like what, and where do we go from there?
All right, so the first thing to think about when it comes to analog is that we live in an analog world, full stop. Our ears fully function as analog. The music we create in a room with air is real analog. There's no getting around that. A drum set is analog, a bass guitar is analog, a singer, 100% analog. So at the very least, we have to dabble in analog just to get music in and out of however we're working with it, however we're recording, however we're processing stuff. It has to be analog to begin with, and it has to be analog to end with. So, the question as to why so many things are trying to emulate analog, or why so many people still hold on to so much analog gear, I think there's layers to that. But the short answer is that a lot of technologies have grown so fast and so far that they're better than the way we used to do it. And analog equipment, by and large, I mean, I'm not talking about like the ease of using Pro Tools versus the complexity of using a tape machine. I'm just talking about the way we process audio, the workflow, how quickly we can do things. That has definitely gotten better. But as far as how things sound, it depends on what you're looking for, but in a lot of ways, audio is one of those places where the horse is still beating the motorcycle. And there's no technology that can still do what the old school stuff can do. And so that leads to a question of why. What is it? And so when we get to the idea of emulating analog stuff, why do we want to emulate analog stuff? Well, it goes to this idea of how to make a mix cohesive, or where do I get saturation, right? We hear this word saturation all the time about how do I get my sounds saturated? What does that mean? And I think it starts with talking about harmonic distortion and the sounds of the sound that aren't the sound. I can play a note on a piano that's the same note on a violin and the same note of an opera singer singing. I can have them all sing middle A. They all will vibrate 440 times a second if I'm, in the Western world tuned to A 440. Why then can my ear tell the difference between a piano, a violin, and an opera singer? And it's the harmonics. It's all the stuff around the note that's not the note itself. And each of those things creates a fingerprint, a timbre. And that's how we can tell the difference between all these sounds. Well, audio equipment has a fingerprint that goes around it too. You hear a lot about second order distortion and third order distortion, and tubes do this kind of distortion or this kind of harmonic saturation, and solid state does this kind, and blah, blah, blah. The short answer is second order harmonics, second order distortion tends to be harmonious with the original sound we created, right? If I take a sound and I double it in frequency, I've created an octave above it. So if the harmonics that are being created by that piece of equipment are in the octave, they tend to sound pleasing. Third order harmonics are odd layered harmonics. So if I add those harmonics to a sound, they tend to not sound harmonious with the original sound. That doesn't mean they're not useful. That can be a harsh sound. That can be a breaking glass sound. That can be, Nine Inch Nails made a whole career off of third order harmonics. There's no wrong answer. It's on how you use it as a piece of art. So if I'm choosing a piano based on the harmonic fingerprint of it, if all pianos play the same notes, why would I choose a $200,000 Bosendorfer over a $1,000 Yamaha, right? What's the difference? It's all these little fingerprints, all these little subtleties that go into it. And if you're choosing that sound as a texture in the recording that you're making, then there's no wrong answer. If you've made that choice, then that's the sound that you want to use. If you're finding a creative way to use a sound that you have, there's no wrong answer. That's the creative choice that you are making with that piece of equipment or that instrument. So it's a balance between working with what you got and working with the sound that you want to hear in your head. And so if people say, oh, I know I could get that sound on an analog XYZ123, then I go find a plugin that emulates it, and it has this user interface that works like the thing I already know how to use. And if it sounds reasonably like it, I can move on. I can get on with my life and get back to making art. I don't have to get bogged down in, I wish I had a such and such. And there's a lot of fingerprint and characteristics in the way that analog equipment was built because they had limitations. And so now when we have digital recreations of those, we're trying to actually recreate the limitations that those original things were built with so that we can incorporate some of that fingerprint into our sound.
Give me a real world example, a piece of gear.
Um, the LA2A compressor, the tube compressor, it's an opto circuit, so it uses a light sensor to determine when the sound is too loud and it needs to attenuate its compression. When you don't have any compression going through it, the sound has to go through all the circuitry of the LA2A. And among them are transformers, which have a ring, they have a weight to them. There's a significance to the sound after it goes through a transformer. There's a resonance that happens inside the transformer that makes your sound thicker. Don't have a more precise way of putting it. There's two transformers on a LA2A that really help that resonance, that thickness of the sound. All the tubes that it goes through, the amplification stage that balances the input to the output and helps you make up the gain and all like that. Even if you're not doing any compression whatsoever, running your sound through an LA2A will put a harmonic fingerprint onto it that doesn't exist before it went through that LA2A. If you compress it, now you get all the flavor of the compressor and all that stuff too, and that rich, it's a very creamy kind of compression that happens on a LA2A. Bass and vocals really benefit from it. But just running the sound through it with no compression happening whatsoever adds a significance, a weight, and a kind of a harmonic sheen to it that didn't exist beforehand. And so when they emulate that in a plugin, a lot of times they'll start with that no setting, and just running the sound through it will do something. A lot of times on plugins, you'll see a switch or a knob that says analog, and sometimes they are adding noise because that can subtly add to the sense of cohesion in a sound. Is that there's an analog noise in the background. We talked about the 1176 and the low noise version. It didn't mean that it was a less noisy box to use. It meant that the sensor that listened to the sound had less noise distracting it from the job it had to do. So it might be something just that subtle where some noise is being added into the algorithm that creates this plugin and changes the way it responds, almost like dithering or something like that. You turn that thing off and it might behave more digitally, but it's still got all the characteristics of the thing they're trying to emulate. So that plugin might do something that the real thing can't. So treating plugin like it's a replacement for the analog thing doesn't always work. You kind of treat them as two different things in the sense that they're very subtly different, but the real thing is very different from the plugin, even though they sound very similar. I almost think of it as, you go into an old school studio and they might have 4 1176s. And over time, you figure out that each one has a character to it. Same thing with plugins. This company's plugin has this kind of character to it. This company's plugin has a different kind of character to it. So when I'm going to do a mix or I'm choosing a compressor out of my plugin list, I might choose this company's compressor because of the characters that go into it. Character that it has. I mean, long, boring story. The analog thing comes down to, we kind of did the best we could with what we had pre-digital. And so now we've been trained as a culture to appreciate some of these sounds. They're built into our head. When you work with vintage equipment, you're not always trying to recreate something that's been done before so much as you're relying on a go-to sound. You're relying on something that's tried and true and proven and has a sonic fingerprint that a lot of people are aware of. And so when you go to work in the digital world, you kind of want to have those same tools. And so there's I think an instinctive level where you are just trying to use the tools you had in the analog world. But then I think there's the element of the motorcycle still can't beat the horse, and the analog stuff still does something magical. And it's because of those inconsistencies in the way it was wired, because there was parts that you could use in the 60s that are illegal now because of the chemicals that go in them that sound different. And there's just no way around that. But the short answer is our ears are analog, our music is analog. It just makes sense that we're going to want to use the most analogish tools to work with them.
Great.
Is that?
Hey.
Is that?
Hey.